The Venus Charm by Jack Sharkey. This story has only ever had two appearances. First in the July 1964 issue of Fantastic Stories of Imagination magazine. Then in the October 1974 issue of Thrilling Wonder Stories. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. The Venus Charm. When Rogan came to, he was lying clear of the wreckage. How he'd escaped the Holocaust that had fused steel fins to crystallite ports, in an amorphous melange still too nearly molten to approach with comfort, he had no idea. Strapped about his waist, its ragged ends charred to black bubbles, was the nylon mesh safety belt that had secured him in place at his seat in the pilot cell toward the nose of the crumpled ship. Had it been stronger, had it truly served its purpose, he would even now be a travesty of a living being, a contorted figure of calcium, iron, and sooty carbon, somewhere within the smoking slag heap that, at his last recollection, had been a sleek, soaring spaceship. With trembling, grateful fingers, he now undid the clasp of that mercifully inadequate belt and let it fall from about his waist to the gritty gray and white sand that had cushioned his, he could only assume, hurtling tumble. Aside from a dull ache in his ribs, the jolt must certainly have driven the breath from his unconscious body. He could detect no damage to his person. The short-sleeved blouse and loose leggings were still intact, as were his Duraflex boots and broad belt, nor could he find any damage to his flesh, save a stiff, post-abrasion soreness along his left cheek and jawline where they'd scraped, then lain upon the sand. His exploring fingers encountered an unwanted lump between blouse and chest, and then, even as his fingers withdrew it upon its slender cord, he remembered the charm he'd won from the Venusian attaché, Earthside, during an off-duty poker game with 5 idle spaceport loungers from as many planets. Valueless to Rogan, he had yet noted the esteem in which its whilom owner had held it, and for that reason alone had allowed the Venusian to stake it against the cards in the final hand of the game. The Venusian had begged him to hold off his departure until he could borrow funds equaling his debt to the Terran player, but Rogan had gotten field clearance for takeoff a half hour before the time of the other's promised return with the cash, and, rather than be dropped back to the end of the long waiting list at the busy field, had considered the Venusian's loss just the fortunes of war and taken off from his berth on schedule. Right into the roughest ether storm in the cosmos, he muttered, both bitter and wryly amused at the results of his action. Where his ship might be now, he had no idea. It lay before him on the sandy soil of somewhere, certainly, but as to where in the universe that somewhere might be, Rogan had no idea. He'd barely set his course and plotted his vectors when the storm had caught the tiny ship in invisible walls of force, blacking out the ship's electric system, dissolving the control panel before his startled eyes into a melting plain of crackling flame. Then a sickening side-slip from reality as a short-circuiting electronic network cut in the hyperspace drive the fleeting instant before Rogan's battered consciousness gave way to merciful blankness. Overhead, the cold white stars lay across the dome of dark emerald night sky in unfamiliar configurations. A good space navigator might be able to divine his probable locale from those stars, taking magnitude and location variables into three-dimensional account. Rogan? Never. He relied, and always had, on the ship's taped circuits that preset a pilot's cosmic vectors, punch a destination and count 3 while the automatic calculators did the rest. Simple, easy, and, he realized now, perilously reliable. Then, abruptly, Rogan threw back his head and laughed aloud as he realized the futility of his situation. Even if I had studied navigation in depth, he thought ruefully, a lot of good it would do me to know where in space I was. Because, he reflected, looking again upon the unrecognizable mass of the ship, wherever he was there to stay, at least for quite a while, till he found a city, if there was one, a city with technological advances at the interstellar travel level at that. There seemed no point in remaining alongside the ship any longer. It had carried him here, then died, and that was that. The surrounding terrain was barren of vegetation, and Rogan suspected that it would be a brutally hot place to trek in daylight. If he were to travel at all, it had best be now, while the cool of darkness persisted. He turned the Venusian charm once between his fingers, then dropped it back within his blouse again and began to walk toward the horizon, licking lips already slightly desiccated by the waterless atmosphere of the place, and trying not to let his mind dwell on memories of men he'd seen dead of thirst in regions all too similar to his own enforced environs. You'll find water, he told himself, and tried not to disbelieve this confident statement that had no basis in reason, only in mortal hope. Walking requires little thought. The legs move of their own accord once triggered by the mind, stopping only at that same mind's behest, or the attainment of sudden pain or utter exhaustion. So Rogan's mind was free to ponder his path along that alien sand. It was idle bemusement more than concentrated thought, but the part of his mind that considered the locale, idly or not, made some interesting observations. The terrain, it noted, was almost entirely featureless, an unusual aspect in a desert region. Not a bare outcropping of wind-worn rock, not a scraggly, tough-skinned travesty of a plant, not so much as a single dune rising before him like an ocean wave gelled in mid-surge. The only relief from total flatness was a sense of planetary curve between Rogan's area of existence and the always retreating horizon. Strange, said the impartial observer in Rogan's mind. And wrong, said Rogan, suddenly taking the mental reins. He halted, pondering deeply, for the first time worried not so much at his overall situation as at the possible peril of his physical environment. Stooping, he took a pinch of the gray and white gritty stuff of the ground between thumb and forefinger, sniffed at and tasted it. Resinous, he decided, puzzledly. Definitely resinous, and, he noted further as he compressed a bit of it tightly between strong digits, sticky. It was as though he were walking on the minute spheroids of not wind-worn silicates, but crystallized glue. Rogan stared at the flat, gummy smears on the ball of thumb and finger, touched them lightly together, then slowly brought them apart again, like a cobweb brought into instantaneous existence, 1,000 fine, silvery strands extruded from the gray-white tackiness of the surfaces, bridging the gap with glistening, tangling filaments of treacherous adhesiveness. From body heat, said Rogan, his voice choked, small and echoless by the night-cloaked vastness about him. He knew not what star might service this planet as its sun, but it would be warm, far warmer than the constant heat of his blood. How deep could such a coating go? He wondered, feeling a sudden premonitory chill along his spine. More than mere inches, or his feet would have scuffed it clear of what firm support lay beneath. His ship, he remembered, was more than half buried in the at first supposed sand. A small ship, it was true, but far taller than his own 6'3". Rogan straightened up and began to walk swiftly, much more swiftly than before. There had to be some place beyond, some spot on which he could be standing when this elusively firm ocean of grit became a choking quagmire of smothering glue. Rogan had no relish to be someday unearthed by some nameless alien archaeologist, frozen like an insect in amber. He slowed his pace for an instant when it occurred to him that his flight could be carrying him deeper into the desert, for all he knew, or even toward the point whereat the sun would arise at dawn. But, he realized, resurging forward, any such speculation was futile. He could not know, by any means at his disposal, which was the shortest route, the safest route. To continue might be foolhardy, but to remain where he stood was madness. His stride became an impatient jog, then a sprint. At first, steady-paced and controlled, but finally a blindly panicky run across the sands, the featureless, changeless sands that stretched before him as far as his staring eyes could see. His throat was raw, his lungs aching, when the stars began to lose luster, and the dome of dark emerald to glint with pale dustings of pink and yellow and orange. Rogan stopped, turned his head in all directions, trying to determine, in an onset of unreasoning despair, from which direction the sun was likely to appear, but he could not. "Don't be a fool," he urged himself. "You've come this far in a straight line. Moving in any other direction is useless." So he kept on even when the first arc of burning sun showed itself over the edge of the planet almost directly before his frightened, perspiring face. Already, as he ran, the spheroids of the gummy surface beneath his boot soles were starting to melt, to fuse one to the other in a glistening, sticky mirror that showed him the inverted images of the climbing orb of the sun and his own racing body. The tackiness began to tug at his feet. Wisps of extruded glue began fluttering behind his boots like tattered pennants. Each footfall seemed to sink deeper as he set it down, to pull free with a soft, sucking noise as he continued onward. Then he saw the shadow. An untoward sight in the flat, smooth desert. The shadow stretched almost to his feet from the horizon, which the burning sun was even then clearing, but retreated from him swiftly as the angle of sun and planet altered. "Whatever it is," Rogan told himself grimly, "it has not melted in the heat. Even if its surface is white-hot steel, I'll climb down it to fry to death before I let myself be pulled into this gray gook." He followed the retreating shadow, knowing it had to lie no farther than the horizon, hoping the horizon was not so far off as it seemed. His last 100 yards were a nightmare. Ankle-deep, finally knee-deep, his motion slowed terrifyingly, as though he were a helpless animation on a film frame in a projector that drooped its shutter with a languorous procrastination. More slowly, by the moment, Rogan waded toward that solitary spot of safety and, scarcely able to credit his miraculous fortune, crawled onto it. It was many moments of agonizing slowness before he had last retrieved both feet from the clinging, resisting surface. Exhausted, he flopped onto his back, threw a forearm across his eyes to block the flaring globe of the sun, and lapsed into unconsciousness. Rogan awoke to a blaze of sun already beyond the zenith of a sky as blue-green as a peacock's tail feathers. Though he was uncomfortably warm, he was not sunburnt, nor did his probing tongue discover lips any more parched than when he had sprawled exhausted upon this solitary safety zone amid the fields of clinging gray-white menace. For the first time he began to investigate the nature of the surface on which he'd taken refuge. A jutting, truncated elbow thrust of solidity in the sea of glassy smooth adhesion. The thing upon which he lay was soft as talc, and of a particularly loathsome fish-belly green in color. Yet, despite the smoothness, the configuration of the surface was ropey, as though coil upon coil of writhing cable segments had tumbled in a heap, then petrified. The deep incisions of shadow beneath and between these arcing shapes mottled the otherwise pallid shade of his perch with lunes of sooty black. His eyes, taking in the strangeness of his locale as he lay partially prone, partially propped up on one elbow, drifted beyond the rim of the talc mound to the surface of the surrounding liquid. Something in the clarity of the reflected sun in that unrippling mirror, its image round as a dime, made him look a bit more closely at it. A separation seemed to have occurred in its depths. The gray-white gluey stuff had settled, leaving a clear covering above as melted fat rises to the surface of meat drippings in a bowl. Rogan scooped a palmful of the clear liquid to his dried lips and tasted it. It was water, tasting just slightly of something akin to turpentine. It nevertheless could quench his thirst. He drank it hungrily, greedily, then got to his feet to better survey his incredible environs. The colloidal part of the surrounding sea, even allowing for the distortion of refraction, must lie 8 feet or more beneath the water, he realized. If he knew which way dry land lay, and how far, he could try to swim for it. Then he thought of nightfall, with the colloids sucking up the liquid once more, the crystals of irresistible sticky murk forming about his flailing, thrashing body, and abandoned the thought. "A boat's what I need," he mused. "That's the only thing could keep me alive during the transitional stage of this mess." He kicked loose an experimental chunk of the ropey solid beneath him, not really hoping it would prove buoyant, and let it skid over the brink into the water. It sank out of sight into the grip of the cloudy glue stuff far below the surface. "So much for wild schemes," he muttered, then chuckled as he imagined his own discomfiture, even if it had floated. How he would hew a dugout from the soft stone, even with his bare hands able to crumble its dusty substance, he had no idea. A boat was out of the question. Rogan sat down disconsolately on the edge of the talc thing and tried to think of some other means of escape. True, his thirst was slaked, but hunger was growing in his viscera, demanding, debilitating his strength. As he sat pondering what might well be his doom, his fingers toyed idly with the Venusian charm that still dangled about his throat. Without being more than casually curious, he glanced at it, turning it slowly between thumb and fingers, noting the fine craftsmanship of its construction. It reminded him vaguely of something. Basically 2 interfitted halves, it combined cool white alabaster with warm, shiny jet in matching portions of light and darkness, as though smoothly hemispheric octopi, one black as night, one a pallid albino, had meshed tentacles, or as though a pair of rounded 8-fingered hands had clasped. Black and white, thought Rogan, day and night, light and darkness. Then the association of ideas plucked upon a chord of memory. Yin and yang, said Rogan. Goodness intertwined with evil. He recalled the Oriental symbol back on Earth, the flat circle divided into two curving tadpole shapes, the head of each pursuing the tail of the other, and the philosophy of absolute equilibrium which had spawned that peculiar symbol. Every good thing has its evil counterpart, he remembered, plumbing his mind for the elusive, ill-learned nature of that symbol. For every act of evil that occurs, a good act is done to maintain the balance of nature. All joy is counterbalanced by sorrow, all courage by cowardice, all hate by love. Still staring at the sharp contrasts of the object in his hand, his mind leaped back to his own circumstances as they had eventuated ever since his winning of this bauble, or so he had deemed it then, from the Venusian, the good luck of getting clearance for takeoff, balanced with the ill luck of that ether storm, the good luck of surviving the plunge into and emergence from an unmonitored journey through hyperspace, contrasted with the near-fatal luck of the crash, but the crash itself mitigated by his miraculous escape from the molten ship, the hideous danger of the glue fields overcome by his finding of this lone upthrusting dry area in the treacherous morass, and the desiccation of the desert-warm sun balanced against the omnipresence of drinkable water when that sun was at its most blazing moment. Odd, he muttered, staring at the thing. Almost too odd to be anything more than cosmic coincidence. Still, such a theory put before a rational being could not be put aside, forgotten, ignored. It demanded of reason that it be put to a test, that it be proven or disproven. But how? Wondered Rogan. If I simply wait to see what will happen next, the outcome could be sheerest coincidence. He shivered at the momentary thought which had crossed his mind and gave it a stern negative response, aloud. And I'm not about to start swimming just on the theory that the bad luck of this glue ocean's recoagulation will necessarily be overcome by something salvational. He'd been turning it slowly in his fingers as he pondered, and the idea of positioning came to him almost immediately. The slow turning of the thing, he realized, might be keeping the forces of good and evil in a state of neutrality. He wondered, though he knew there was no longer any way to ascertain just how that black and white bauble had lain against his breast beneath the surface of his blouse, if the side toward the wearer was that which determined the sort of luck the wearer would have. He could conjure up two theories on that, either as tenable as the other. White side in might bring good luck, black side in bad luck, by exerting its unknown influence over the wearer. Or either side out might exert that influence over events. There was but one way to find out. Rogan carefully laid the bauble upon his breast, white half upon his flesh, black half outward, and waited. After many minutes he could detect no change in himself or his environment, although, and this could be attributed merely to his concentrated preoccupation, his hunger pangs seemed to have entirely abated. They could come back quite easily, he told himself. Maybe they're just taking a breather on their own. Empty stomachs don't growl continually, after all. He waited a few more minutes, then shrugged and reversed the lie of the charm upon his chest, black side innermost. He was pulled from his concentration by a sound, a hissing, fizzling sound of powerful effervescence, of seething, bubbling wetness. It came from just beyond the rim of the talc thing on which he sat. Carefully, so as not to disturb the bauble, Rogan leaned to one side and peered down into the sunlit depths of the tranquil ocean beside his perch. Things were swimming there, ropey, tubular, eel-like things. They slithered and undulated in all directions in the water down there, their movement roiling up gray clouds of stickiness from the colloids beneath their passage. No, not all directions. Every direction save toward his perch. But where were they coming from? He wondered, and leaned a bit further over so that his vista included the base of the talc stone itself, where it ramped steeply down into the surging colloidal gray. "Eggs!" said Rogan, with a yelp of startled realization. "I'm sitting on a mound of eel eggs, and they're hatching." Even while he got his wits together, the undersurfaced angle of his perch was diminishing as the pale green, ropey talc flickered with sleekness, wriggled furiously, then burst away into sizzling, bubbling shards as the eager inmate found its freedom. "Good grief!" Rogan choked out, then remembered the black and white bauble upon his breast, and with fumbling, frantic fingers, reversed it. The hissing slowed, petered out, ceased. The last of the wriggling eels slithered off into the sea. The tail thing was dormant once again. "Whew!" gasped Rogan, wiping salty rivulets of sweat from his brow as he once more surveyed the area of safety remaining to him. The dusty, pale green surface seemed reduced by at least 1/4. "A close one," he murmured. "A very close one," he added, as the horrible thought came to him that the onset of eel births might have happened before he learned the source of its instigation. The bauble was definitely dangerous to wear, and dangerous to throw away. "Without it," he reasoned, "I'm at the mercy of anything this idiotic planet feels like dishing out. But with it, I'm at the mercy of whatever position it happens to lie at any given moment." He had no means of securing it firmly against himself. A careful placement inside one of his boots might hold it in position, but it'd be hell trying to walk with it there, and it could slowly turn about after a while, and bad luck would be beating him over the head while he frantically fought the securing straps of the boot to get back at the thing. For that same reason, pressing it against his abdomen beneath his belt might occasion a fatal delay. Besides, he thought abruptly, it might only operate when held against the wearer's breast. This theory was swiftly tested and proven. Only when the black side lay on his breast at the end of its cord did the eel things begin to burst from the green eggshells once more, before Rogan reversed the bauble again and halted them. He thought only fleetingly of the glue fields themselves. For a wild moment he began to consider waiting until sunset, then plucking some of the reformed glue from beside the egg mound and using it to stick the white side of the charm against his breast, more or less permanently, and start off toward the horizon over the sand-fine colloids, or crystals, or whatever they became at night, in perfect safety. There were at least 3 things wrong with this plan, he realized a scant moment after devising it. 1. At night, the glue on the bauble would regain its sand form and allow the dangerous charm to swing freely. 2. On the following morning, even if he somehow survived the glue phase of the transition into colloid and water, he would find himself swimming in a solvent of the glue he needed to hold the thing in place if dry land had not been reached. And 3. The thing was, after all, a Venusian artifact, and the race being amphibious, even if he held it white side in when he sank into the sea, the bauble might not consider the new environment a menace, and would do nothing. Still, he frowned, pondering this last point, it did seem to think a plunge into the water was bad luck, or it would not have started those eel things hatching when I put the dark side down. An unnerving idea came to him then, and Rogan almost wept with frustration. Or maybe I've figured wrong. The other things, the storm, the crash, and all, would be as bad for a Venusian as for me, but possibly having the black side inward was bringing me the Venusian good luck of losing the perch. The bauble doesn't know what the wearer is doing. Its forces might assume that a Venusian lying out in the sun was unconscious and try to help him into a happier environment. It was maddening. Rogan held unthinkable power, the power for good fortune or evil, on a cord about his throat, and he still didn't know how to use it beneficially. Other tests came to his mind, but he dismissed them as useless. He could, for instance, place white or black upon his breast and then attempt something harmful, like biting his tongue or pinching his flesh. But what could he prove by that? The bauble might consider good luck to be success in the attempt to hurt himself, or bad luck to be failure, mightn't it? In fact, Rogan said, nearly stupefied by the chilling philosophical insight he'd just had, who is to say what's good or bad luck in any case? So much depends on one's viewpoint. Even death can be good luck under certain circumstances, even simple circumstances like simply being tired of living. And how can I know what the bauble is going to decide is best for me? And then he knew at last that, with or without the bauble about his throat, the odds against outguessing the probable future remained the same, 50-50. Because, he mused wearily, nobody knows what's beneficial, really. It's that damned old blessing in disguise bit. Out of evil may come forth good sometimes, and vice versa. Which explained, he understood all at once, why the creator of this charm, who must have known which half controlled good fortune and which controlled bad, had yet included both in its manufacture. Balance, equilibrium, the teetering poise of the events of the cosmos must be maintained at all costs. To have all good luck could be an evil, if only against one's less fortunate fellows. To have all bad luck could be a good, insofar as it taught the unlucky bearer the virtues of humility, courage, and endurance. Still, Rogan said, slowly, staring at the gleaming halves of the charm in the reddening rays of the approaching sunset, if I had my choice of the two, he would choose only good luck. Who would not? Selfish as such a desire might be, it was only natural to prefer good fortune to bad. And here in his hands, he thought, his mind trembling at the magnitude of the idea growing within it, he had his choice of either. All he need do would be to prize the intertwined halves apart. Then select the good one. Constructed from two discriminate substances, there had to be a way to get the twin-sized, seamless halves apart. And in doing so, Rogan realized, I will know which half is which. For it had come to his mind that no mucilage, no bolt, no welding had been necessary to join the twain. The very nature of what they were did the trick. The good half would cling hard, lest relenting should admit the evil ungoverned into the universe. The evil would cling, lest it were the cause of unbridled goodness being set free. Good could not do such an evil deed, nor evil such a good. Therefore, Rogan had the method by which they might be pried asunder. He would turn their own natures against them. With thumb and forefinger of each hand, he gripped the separate portions of the charm, black in his left fingers, white in his right. Now, he willed fiercely, playing a psychological trick on his consciousness. My hands tug apart, gently but firmly, yet my right hand does not wish the white half to come free of its counterpart, but my left hand does wish to separate the black. His tugging produced no result, and so at last he knew that the white was good, for it had done as it was bidden, knew that the black was evil, for it had refused. Therefore, he said, shivering in near frightened anticipation of what he was about to do, I reverse my commands. My right hand wants the white half to come free. My left does not want the black to do so. Whiteness, release. Darkness, hold fast. Soundlessly, sinuously, smoothly, the limbs of the two octopi, the two clasped round 8-fingered hands, slipped apart before Rogan's eyes into their basic components. I've done it! He roared aloud in triumph. And then, swifter than a flickering eyelid, than a striking snake, the 8 limp limbs of each half lashed out, and wrapped and clung like leeches to the balls of Rogan's left and right thumbs, and simultaneously, euphoria, serenity, surging ecstasy flooded through the entire right side of Rogan's body, while rending, agonizing, shrieking pain contorted his left. As he staggered, spread-legged atop the egg mound, a visible line of demarcation sundered the planetary surface before and behind him, and where his joyous right hand flung outward in happiness, the coagulating glue sands vanished to be replaced by lush green arbors, rolling hills, cool blue streams, even as his throbbing, flailing left hand created a planetary chaos of boiling sulfur pots, boiling plumes of scorching flame, and a screaming wind of blackness and torment. The sky to Rogan's right pulsed and glowed with a rainbow of sunset color and the slowly appearing blue-green mantle of night, cooled by a billion sparkling stars, while the cosmos to his left exploded into flame and fusion and hurtling comets of illimitable debris. The very fabric of existence began to fray along the plane of the terrible breach of all equilibrium of energy and matter. Chronology itself was wrenched apart, slammed together again, overlapped, mingled, spun upside down for a tottering, whirling brush against the ageless matrix of infinitude. Until I can return with the necessary cash, said the Venusian, dangling the bipartite bauble before Rogan's eyes. Rogan looked at it, frowning. It seemed familiar to him, somehow. His hand reached out to it, then abruptly withdrew. Hell, he said. That's of no use to me. You can send me the money when you get it. A light blinked on the wall over the exit. That's my clearance, sighed Rogan, getting up from the table. See you guys around. He hurried through the doorway and trotted across the field to his waiting ship. Blastoff and journey were uneventful. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.